Well, last week it was former Conservative Minister Andrea Jenkins who announced her defection to Reform UK.
That's right, but this week the founder of Conservative Home, a familiar face to anybody that follows politics on the TV, Tim Montgomerie, has been announced as the latest high-profile Conservative to join Reform UK, and he joins us now in the studio. Thank you so much, Tim, for coming in. Simple question, why?
Well, look, it's been coming for a long time, and, you know, it wasn't an easy decision. In many ways, I was sad yesterday because when you're part of a political party as long as I was, 36 years, it makes me feel old, that's one of the things, is you're leaving behind friends as well, you know, really important relationships. And so there are plenty of times, you know, my sort of pen hovered over the decision to defect and I pulled back. But the final straw for me really was last Thursday's immigration numbers.
Yeah.
And how many times, Bev, you know, you sat with us, Tory, and over the last few years, and they said they were controlling immigration.
Yeah.
And then we learnt last Thursday, actually, immigration had hit record levels. And it wasn't the Channel crossings. It wasn't things beyond the Conservative ministers' control. It was actually within ministers' ability to control those numbers, and they let immigration out of control. And it was, for me, the final deceit and made me take the decision that I did yesterday, which led me to hand over £25 to Nigel Farage and become a Reform member.
You and Elon Musk, heavy rollers.
Not quite in the same league as Elon Musk.
I mean, I suppose people might say, though, you know, those immigration figures, although they are absolutely terrible, they are the fault of the last government.
Yeah.
And should you not give Kemi Badenoch a chance? You know, they've now got 4.5 years in opposition to come up with some sort of plan to reverse what's happened.
Yeah. Well, when does Kemi Badenoch start as Tory leader, Miriam?
I take that as a rhetorical question, Tim.
She's been there for a while now. I can't remember sort of such a low, you know, impact start from a new political leader in the long time that I've been covering politics. And I've got nothing against her, but for me, the fundamental issue is Nigel Farage joked last week. He said if Tory MPs had to defect to another party, half would join Reform and half would join the Lib Dems.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Kemi Badenoch at some point has to lead the Conservative Party. But to lead the Conservative Party is almost to divide it. Because if she wants to lead it in a certain direction, there are going to be sections of that party who will say, no, we don't want to go that way. We'll say that. And that's why I've decided to go Reform, because whatever else you may not always agree with Reform, but you know when Nigel Farage says something, he means it. You know, the party's going in a clear direction. And unfortunately for the Conservative Party, it's going around in circles.
Did the election of Trump make any difference to you, Tim, in this discussion? Because I've been saying for a while, if Trump won in America, where they go, we often follow, for good and bad. That's what happens. We are in the slipstream, aren't we, to some degree, of what happens in America. Has his appointment emboldened Reform?
Definitely. And I look back, Miriam, you're a former Conservative MP, I look back at the opportunity the Conservative Party had, the Conservative government had, after Brexit. People voted to leave the European Union, but also they wanted a different kind of country. And what the Conservative Party did was they increased immigration, they embarked upon the net zero disaster, in my view, which, you know, has put up the prices for people of energy, and they went in the wrong direction on things like basic values. And so, whereas Donald Trump, he has built the Republican Party into a confident now, working-class friendly political force in America. It could probably dominate American politics for the next 10 years. And so he basically succeeded in doing what the Conservative Party failed to do. And that's sad. And for me now, much better place to build a new political party that serves the average person in this country is Reform than the Tories.
And I think a lot of our viewers will have a lot of sympathy with that. And I think one of the interesting things about your defection, if we want to call it that, is that you are not seen as on the hard right of the Conservative Party. You're seen as a mainstream Conservative, obviously strong connections with the Centre for Social Justice, you know, lots of interest in those, what people might say, softer side of conservatism. So this is a really big moment, really, in terms of mainstream Conservatives moving over to Reform UK. But are you worried about the next election in the sense that, you know, let's say Reform does go from strength to strength. They get to 25, even 30 in the polls, and the Conservatives drop down to, let's say, 20. I don't think they're going to go lower than that. There's still plenty of people out there who will only vote Conservative. Couldn't that split of the vote just let Labour back in again for another term? And who does that help?
Yes, is the answer to your
How do you
question.
mitigate that?
Well, at some point in the next few years, not now, I think both the Conservative Party and Reform are sort of going to be in a wrestling match for a little while, who's going to get the upper hand. But at some time in the next few years, the two parties need to reach an accommodation. Now, I have no idea, and it's above my pay grade, what sort of a relationship, form that would take. But it might be the Conservative Party stands down largely in certain northern seats, Reform stands down in southern seats, because getting rid of Labour absolutely is the number one priority. Labour's a party that's doing incredible damage to this country. But for me now, I think Reform is the ascendant party. Reform is talking about the issues that I care about, I think most British people care about, and I'd like to see them in any relationship between the two parties. I'd like them to be the dominant player rather than the sort of subsidiary player.
How many Tory MPs or former Tory MPs have been on the phone to you in the last 24 hours, Tim Montgomerie, saying, right, mate, talk me through it. How did it work? How did it work?
Where do I send my 25
Who do I
quid?
talk to? And what do you think? Is it going to be a good thing for me to do as well?
No one has been quite that specific. Not everyone is like Bev Turner. But where I think people are at is, it's been very interesting. My phone has melted, and half the people are very sad, and they feel, why have you left? They sort of feel deserted. Some are angry with me. But a lot of people are saying, I've been tempted to do the same. So I haven't had, with a Conservative MP, certainly members are saying they're, I think a few will follow me. But MPs, not quite in that position, but certainly some, including members of the Shadow Cabinet, have said to me they are very tempted to do the same.
Including members of... Really? Yeah. Wow.
You supported Robert Jenrick, I think, for the leadership.
Yeah.
Would you have made this decision had he won?
I was hoping no one would ask me that question.
And now we're going to a break.
No, I don't think I would have done. I think Robert Jenrick seemed to me to get and understand how precarious the Conservative Party position was in. He had an urgency about him and some substantial position. So maybe I would have ended up in the same position a bit later on.
Yeah.
But no, I think Robert Jenrick would have kept me in the Conservative Party for longer.
Well, interesting, Tim. What are you going to be doing between now and the next sort of election then?
Well,
what's
I'm
your
still a
job
journalist. I'm
involved?
not going to stand for Parliament. I said to Nigel Farage yesterday, I caused a lot of trouble for the Conservative Party. Do you really want me inside your ranks? And he said, well, we're a rebel organisation, and you can be a rebel within our ranks.
And you wouldn't stand in 4 years?
I struggle, I think, to sit beneath any sort of manifesto, any sort of clear...
But is this going to be a problem for Reform? Because you're absolutely right, the Conservative Party is split. There's Liberals on one side, small C Conservative on the other. Absolutely correct, plain to see. But the bigger Reform gets, obviously, the harder it will be for them to agree on everything. We saw the assisted suicide vote last week. Yes, it was a free vote. Yeah. But even so, a lot of social Conservatives like me quite dismayed that 3 out of the 5 Reform MPs supported that very unconservative change. I mean, could this... these problems are going to come to Reform, aren't they? The more mainstream they become.
Oh, yeah. It's... any party has growing pains, and Reform are going to go through growing pains. I think the advantage is it may not work if Reform became the government, but at the moment Nigel Farage is such the dominant player in that party. I think people will take his lead. So I think so long as he's there as the leader, I think it can be a reasonably united force.
OK, brilliant.
Very interesting.
Former high-profile Conservative Tim Montgomerie, now high-profile Reform UK member. So interesting times, is it not?